Hello and welcome to On the Move, a show about what's happening in Hampton Roads, featuring community leaders who are moving the region forward. I'm Thomas Becker with Hampton Roads Transit, and today we're in this historic building. It's the former Army Motor Pool building here at Fort Monroe in Hampton. And since we love to talk transit, today we're going to be featuring a remarkable project. It is the restoration of a 100-year-old streetcar that you see behind us, and it's called the 390 Project. And we'll learn more with Greg Siegel here. He's the project co-chair. Welcome, Greg, and thank you for taking the time to walk us through this piece of history.
Well, thank you for inviting me and letting everybody know more about what we're doing here.
Yeah. Let's start with the name. How did it get its name?
Well, it's called the Hampton's Streetcar Project 390. 390 is the car's number. So when it was on the track between Hampton, Newport News, and Buckrow, and so forth, it was called the 390 streetcar. The project part came where we're not just restoring the streetcar, right? We also wrote a book to preserve the history of the streetcar service on the Lower Peninsula. And we also have interviewed folks that rode the streetcar.
And we'll talk more about your book at the end, because I want people to check that out. So this is ultimately going to be on display when it's finished at the Hampton History Museum. Yes. Tell us about where you are now in the stage of restoration.
Well, our restoration is slow but sure. Let's start from that. The streetcar came down to Fort Monroe, raised enough money by 2017 to bring it down, but we had to raise even more money, so we started restoration in 2019. Of course, we know about COVID, stopped the world basically for a year, 2 years, and it stopped us also. But now we're kind of back in the groove of things and moving forward. Right now we're about 60% completed. We have volunteers that work Saturday morning from 7 to noon. And there's just a lot of sanding, a lot of painting, a lot of scraping, and so forth to get done.
Well, tell me about the volunteers. I mean, it's quite the dedicated crew to give up every Saturday. What is some of their backgrounds and their skills?
Well, the skill, basically, if you like working with power tools and working with your hands, we can work with you in terms of what we need done. Okay. And so we're very conscious of, putting people in their comfort zone. And not overdo them and saying, okay, I can't do this. Because we've been doing it for so long, 2017, 19 to present, a lot of volunteers has come and gone because of the project and how long it takes to get it done. We have about 5 right now dedicated people that come every Saturday. And then we have about a dozen folks from the shipyard that alternate on Saturday morning. So we get 2 or 3 per Saturday that will work with the volunteers, the main volunteers, and we can kind of move forward a little bit quicker.
So if you like working with your hands or you like working on historic projects, this may be one for you.
Definitely.
Let's talk history here.
Yes.
This was a working streetcar. When it was built, how long did it serve? It used to be a home as well.
Yes, that's why we have it. Well, what we know, to start from the beginning, is we know that this might be, hopefully, is the last streetcar that ran in Hampton and Newport News and parts in between. It was built in 1917, and it was delivered in 17, and it was put on use through January 16th, 1946. We know that date because that was the last date of streetcar service when everything finally changed over to buses, all the routes. This is one of the last 20 streetcars. All the other ones were sold off for parts and so forth. The last 20 were put up for sale. What the streetcar company did was take off anything good so they could resell it, turn it into cash. So it was all stripped down to bare nothing. And then they sold them, and they sold them repurposing. It could be a house, it could be a diner, it could be a motel room, it could be all sorts of things that people have across the country use streetcars when they came available and bought. Our streetcar was bought by the Andersons. Mr. and Mrs. Anderson lived in Newport News at the time, and they owned some property in York County. The property, if you go down, you're familiar with 17, you know where the hardware store is. I think it's a True Value hardware store now. That was their property. And on that property, they moved the streetcar to that, and they lived in it until 1976.
It's like a tiny house before its time.
Exactly, exactly. It was stripped of everything. So they had a 3-room house basically. They had a kitchen, a living area, and a bedroom. They did not have any running water. They had a well outside, and they had an outhouse. They raised chickens and goats and so forth, and so on. Mr. Anderson died in the late 60s. Miss Anderson continued living in it until the winter of '76. During that whole time of transition, the hardware store bought some of the property and they built the hardware store. And then when Miss Anderson finally did leave the car, and she was in her 80s by then, they moved the streetcar closer to the road and used it as storage. And that's how it was found.
Okay.
In 1977.
And so take us from then on. What happened?
In 1977, there was a gentleman from the Baltimore Streetcar Museum. And I don't know if anybody's been up to Baltimore to see their streetcar museum, but it's phenomenal.
It's well known, yeah.
Yeah, well known. So the story goes, a gentleman from the museum was driving on 17 to go back to Baltimore from a vacation at Virginia Beach. He stopped for some reason to get a drink or something, and he looked out the back window and he said, "That looks like a streetcar." So what he did, he got out, of course, he went into the hardware store, asked some questions about it, he took pictures of it and went back to the Baltimore Museum, talked to the president and all those folks that might be interested in a streetcar. What they found out is that this was a Brill semi-convertible car. And go back in time, back in 1917, is that our company here was a very small company. So they did not have an engineering department, drafting, that they really couldn't have designs on what kind of car they had. So they teamed up with Baltimore Streetcar Company and bought whatever they were buying. So Baltimore did not have, for one reason or another, a car of their own that ran in Baltimore. So they were interested in our car because it was from the same order that they placed in 1917, but this car came to Hampton and other cars went to Baltimore. So they were interested in getting it back. And so the museum got a hold of the owner of the hardware store, and they agreed that the owner would donate the car to Baltimore. And in November of '77, it was Thanksgiving Day weekend, they came down and pulled the car out and drove it back up to the museum.
And it lived there. It was there for a little bit.
It was there for over 30 years.
Okay.
As all museums, and especially when you're working with volunteers, big ideas bubble up and then they bubble back down. It's not important anymore.
Right.
Well, over the course of 30 years, people were interested in restoring it, but there was not enough interest to restore it. So by 2013, the museum called our museum and said, "We have your streetcar, do you want it back?" And so with that, a bunch of, and I'd say a bunch, but department heads and the museum curator and the executive director all went to Baltimore to see what they were talking about. And they saw the car. It was in pretty bad shape, of course, by then, sitting there for 30 years, sitting outside for a house for 30 years. And they came back and had a lot of conversations, and it was determined this might be a good thing to bring back to Hampton and be part of the History Museum.
So here we see some of the original, was this cherry wood?
Yep, it was cherry. And then there's oak being used also. The streetcar itself is an all-wood car with very little structural steel in it. And so what we're trying to do in the restoration is keep as much as we can. Unfortunately, over time and being in the weather and such and such, there's a lot of wood rot. If you look at all the windowsills are all brand new.
Right, you can tell where the renovation's taken place.
Right, and then you can see the roof.
Up here.
Yeah, this is our original roof that we stripped down. Being because it's been painted over and over by the Streetcar company, and then the Andersons got it and they painted it, we stripped everything down to the bare wood, and then we start over again. The roof inside the car is as is, the platform were white.
Okay.
The floor originally was gray, and then all the sides and all the wood was stained.
And you'll match that.
We're going to match that exactly.
In your process of renovation, this is really an extensive project. Any treasures were found?
Well, we found two. I was hoping for more. Okay, I really was. But we found a World War II token. So when you had your what do they call it, the certificate, to buy things, war rations, you got back, not change, you got back a token, either a red token or I think an orange token. And so we found an orange token between. And recently, when we were working on the floor, we found a dime from, I think it was 1921 or 2. But that's all we found. We knew we weren't going to find tokens. The Streetcar did not use tokens. Other Streetcar companies did use tokens. What we used were tickets or a nickel to get on and off. So we knew we weren't going to find tokens, but we were hoping for something, and we got 2, so we're happy.
And when I look at the original construction, I think of the old adage that they don't build it like they used to.
Right.
What is your thought on the craftsmanship? Granted, it's been deteriorated over the years, but from what you're seeing, what's the craftsmanship like?
It's amazing. J.G. Brill was probably the biggest streetcar company in the world. This was made in Philadelphia, and you have to, our biggest thing is we think back, this was all done by hand. They didn't have electric tools. They had tools that was feeded by belts and whatever and transferred over, or hand work done at a bench table and stuff. And it's just amazing the quality of work and how long it was at. And they probably had 20 people working on a car, and then another 20 people working on part of the car behind them, working on the windows or doors or whatever. And it just amazes, how it came together. Being an all-wood car, you see the joint, everything is jointed together. Everything is wood screwed together. There is no nails whatsoever. Everything is screwed one way or the other, and it's a flat-headed screw. So you can imagine us trying to back out flat-headed screws versus easier to do when you have a Phillips screw. But what we're doing is putting all flatheads back in. So we're trying to make it as original as possible with the information that we have.
You mentioned it was about 60% done. Not to put you on the spot,
No,
do you have
no.
a completion date in mind?
I don't. People ask me all the time, when are you going to get it done? Well, it really has to do with money.
Sure.
Okay. Money is really the driving force.
Let's talk about that. How much more do you need, and how can people help in the cause?
Well, we need about another $60,000 probably to finish the car. But the main thing we need is, and we haven't really started fundraising yet, because we want to get the car done first. Right. So after the restoration of the streetcar is done, we're going to be building an educational pavilion, we like to call it, which we replaced downtown Hampton in front of the History Museum. What we look at this car doing is to present the story of the 20th century. Yeah. Our History Museum is great. You walk in, you're looking at 1610.
Yeah, history.
And you go all the way up through the different decades and so forth. But by the teens and the 20s, there's not a lot of room in the museum to talk about that, as you know when you go through it. And 30s, and there's a lot going on. We had World War I, we had World War II, we had the beginning of the shipyard in 1889, we had the beginning of Langley and NASA in 1917.
So while this was driving, there was a lot going on.
There was a lot going on. This has been around a long time, and there was no set route. So we could say that this car probably did go to Hilton when Hilton Village was being built, and those residents would take those guys to the shipyard. And we know it took him to Buckrow Beach, on Saturdays and Sundays, and during the week there was parties, church parties went there, special occasions and things. We know that happened. We know in 1933 hurricane it ran during that time. Okay, so it's seen a lot of different changes in this area over its lifetime.
How can people follow up on the progress here and maybe reach out and donate as well?
Sure. We don't have a website, but we have a Facebook page. It's Hampton's Streetcar Project. You can log on there, be a friend there. We put pictures up, and you can follow along the progress there. Or you can just talk to the History Museum, and you can leave me a note there or so forth, and I'll get back in touch.
And you mentioned the book.
Yes.
How can folks get a hold of that one?
Well, the book is sold in 2 different places. It's on Amazon, so just type in Hampton Streetcar. You can come through there on Amazon, and it's also at the museum book gift shop, and also at the Virginiana store in downtown Hampton.
I wanted to end with more about the pavilion that's being built.
Yes.
What is that going to look like? How will it feature the streetcar?
Right. Well, the goal is for our building to look like the streetcar barn. That's what they call them back then. It's going to be made of glass and steel, so you can see in from all sides. We're going to light it at night, and then the streetcar will be lit underneath, so that when you pass it, you'll say, "Wow, this is pretty cool." We'll have signage and so forth that you can see from the outside and the inside, so that if the streetcar is not open, if you don't want to go into the museum to get a ticket to go to see the car up close and personal, you can just see it from the outside and enjoy it that way, and so forth. We will be doing special events during the course of the year involving streetcars, and probably definitely involving HRT.
Would love
and
to
be
be part of that.
invited.
We love transit in
Yep.
any form and
Right.
function, right?
And this is the first form of mass transit,
Yeah.
In the United States.
I can already see the kickoff cocktail party in here. So, no, this has been a terrific visit and a wonderful, really impressive piece of
Well,
work.
I
So
sure appreciate it.
Thank you for that, and best wishes for.
And you're
success.
invited.
Can't wait to see it.
Well, you're invited anytime. So, once let's say we get a little bit farther done, I'll invite you over for a quick
We'd love to check in on
update.
that. Absolutely.
And then, of course, you'll be invited when we get it done.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us for On the Move.